So for my photojournalist spotlight, I'm here with my friend Ryan Vizzions. This is Ryan. He just happens to be visiting right now, which is the first time I've seen him since 2017.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway, before I move on, this is your most quote unquote viral famous photo, correct?
Yes, I've had a few that have gone viral, and I've actually had, yes, it is definitely the photo that I'm most known for.
So before we move on, give us some context of when that photo was taken.
Sure. So this photo was taken October 27th, 2016. It was during the raid of what was known as Treaty Camp, or Sacred Land Camp. It was a camp.
That's freedom.
It was a camp that was about 1.5 miles north of Ocheti-Shikoyi camp, which was the main resistance camp of the No Dapple movement. And this photo was taken on the day that the camp was raided by militarized police, as you can see in the photograph. The horse rider, her name is Mega May. She's part Lakota. And when I took the photograph, I didn't have any idea the impact it would make. I had posted it on the internet, and the world took it from there, and it spread like wildfire around the world. And I'm proud of the photograph, but I'm more honored to become good friends with the woman who was in the photograph, who symbolizes strength and power of what that movement was really about.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful, impactful. So on that note, all right, this is the street cred. Who is Ryan Vizzions?
Who is Ryan Vizzions? I am an independent photographer and photojournalist from Atlanta, Georgia. I began photography in 2000, and I started taking photography seriously in 2014. I got into photography around 2010 as a way to deal with depression and anxiety. And I found that it was one of the few outlets that really allowed me to focus at the time. I was going through some issues with the passing of my father. And I started off doing urban exploring, cityscape, street photography. And over time, I started, delving into other styles, landscape photography. Eventually found my way to photojournalism as a way to amplify and spread awareness of various social movements that were taking place. I worked a lot in my earlier days of photojournalism with Black Lives Matter, Freedom University. This was back in 2014, 2015, and eventually kind of led to a career. Some of the notoriety on the left came from the Standing Rock movement. Photos of the year from ABC News, People, The Guardian, some photos featured in Nobel Peace Prize forums. But then there's, like the Creative Loafing and WABE, which are Atlanta outlets who were paying attention and supporting my work before Standing Rock as well.
And this is freedom, everybody.
Freedom I actually found when I was photographing Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico in 2017. So he is part of the photograph and photojournalism story, just a different aspect.
Yep.
And he's an attention hog.
He's an attention hog. So this upper is Atlanta?
Yep, that is probably most known location in Atlanta. It's Jackson Bridge, and as you can see why, it's a really great landscape of the city. It's photographed every sunset by 20, 30 photographers, and a big thing for me, especially when shooting landscape or cityscape, is how can you approach a well-known location or a well-known subject from a little different perspective. And so this photograph was actually photographed during golden hours. You can see the lights are coming down through the through the buildings. And it was a long exposure with bright light shining pretty much right in the lens. And, it took like 20, 30 tries to get it, but it worked. I love that photo.
And then the bottom one was from Standing Rock.
The bottom photograph is from Standing Rock. Actually, that is actually the very first photo I took at Standing Rock. When I first showed up there, I wasn't intending to document the movement like I did. I came just to kind of stand in solidarity. And when I first showed up, I was probably, and at least in my eyes, one of maybe a handful of white guys there. There wasn't a whole lot of, it was mostly a native-led movement at that point. It was before worldwide awareness, and people came from all over. And I was afraid to photograph because I didn't want to be intruding on anybody. So I actually snuck out of my tent at like 2 a.m. because I wanted to photograph this teepee at night. And it just so happened that the Milky Way lined up perfectly. And so when I took this photo, it was I want to say a personal message to myself that I was on the right path. And it's kind of what led me to come back a month later and stay.
Now here we are at Standing Rock. This one with the tear gas, I showed up the day before that. So I was standing on the shore on that one. That's when I first saw you in action, and you were taking these photos, and I was blown away at the amount of freaking pepper spray that guy has. And so you want to tell us a little bit about these two?
Sure. So the photograph on the left-hand side is of Chief Orville Looking Horse of the Lakota Sioux. This photo was actually taken after the Defend the Sacred photo. What you're seeing is a bunch of burnt down vehicles that were on what was called Backwater Bridge. Now, in the photograph, he's carrying a bag, and in that bag is actually a chanupa, a prayer pipe of the Lakota, and that had been taken during the raiding of Treaty Camp, which is that first photo. And he had just met with law enforcement to get that chanupa back from the law enforcement and bring it back to camp. It was more of an exchanging of a sacred item back to the culture. And, there's a lot of symbolism within this photograph. I felt, you have a Lakota leader, in his traditional headdress and carrying a chanupa, but I also showed the context of what was taking place in the environment at the time. A very intense standoff had just taken place where, as you could see, vehicles were burnt to the ground. And it was kind of a moment of, I don't want to say reckoning, but a moment of calm in a situation of chaos. And that photo really spoke out to me in that sense. Now, the photograph on the right-hand side was taken at what was called Turtle Hill. And what you had was a bunch of water protectors were trying to access a sacred site that is behind the law enforcement. On top of that hill is where some ancestral burial grounds were. And the law enforcement had been using that hill as a scouting point. And so they were trying to come up and reclaim that land, which was burial land. And they were met head on at the water of the Cannonball River, and just stopped dead in their tracks. As you could see, tons of pepper spray, rubber bullets were being shot that day. Journalists were actually shot with rubber bullets on the other side of the river. And it was a very intense day. I felt that this photograph really symbolized what took place that day, but also some of the raw brutality that water protectors and protesters were dealing with at the time. You have somebody pointing a beanbag gun or a firearm directly in somebody's face who is obviously not a physical threat. And you're pretty submissive in a situation when you're up to your waist in water. And, it spoke very poignantly to the situation that was taking place that day.
Yeah, that was crazy. That was my first full day there.
Welcome to Standing Rock.
Yeah. I think it was the next day I met you up at the tent for a media meeting. So anyway, next slide. So these are Is this one from 2015?
So the photo on the left is from 2016, I believe. That was during Black Lives Matter. That was in Atlanta, Georgia. And it's hard to even keep track of how many people have been killed by law enforcement. But this march was for the March of Philando Castile. And see, I can't even. Lord, what was the other gentleman's name? He was in New Orleans. He was shot in the chest outside of. It's so many.
Yeah.
But this was, for Philando Castile in Atlanta, Georgia in 2016. And then the photo on the right is another image from Standing Rock, which was what was called the Last Prayer March, which was an action that was taken on one of the last days of Standing Rock, where there had still been hundreds of water protectors that were still in camp, and law enforcement raiding the camp was imminent. And it was a prayer walk to safely lead people out of camp and across the Cannonball River back onto reservation land, because nobody knew what was going to happen at the time. All we knew is that the camp was about to be raided, and there was a lot of firearms. And so it was a safe resistance and a kind of final goodbye to camp for a lot of water protectors.
It was a really sad day.
I cried a lot that day.
Yeah, me too. So something a little more contemporary. Can you tell us about these three?
Yeah, contemporary. These are all within the last 5 years, but yeah.
But the way time moves.
Sure. So the photo on the far left is from the election in 2020 that was in a town called Rome, Georgia, which was one of the strongholds for the KKK in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
I traveled up there on election night to see what was happening, and it was such a small town, there wasn't a whole lot happening. But as you can see, there was more than meets the eye. These two guys who look like a character from what was it?
Monty Python.
Monty Python. We're outside of a Burger King, which ironically enough, they're the jokes here, right? Waving the flag. And when I asked if I can come up and take the portrait, the first thing they told me is, we're not racist. And that's a very interesting way to open up any conversation. But like I said, Rome, Georgia is historically one of the most racist towns in the United States, specifically in Georgia. And so there's a lot of really dark history over in that area. So, what you say and how you act are two totally different situations. Right. The center photo, which is a National Guardsman outside the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., when the insurrection took place on January 6th, I was in Atlanta. I've been on the road for the last 8 months, but I happened to be in Atlanta at the time that it happened. And as soon as it started happening, I drove all the way to D.C. because I said if anything else was going to happen, I was going to be there. And so I stayed up in D.C. from the 7th of January, because I missed the insurrection, up until the inauguration. And I was able to photograph the entire process of what happened with the inauguration, which was, first they had the National Guard on the ground to protect the Capitol building before multiple layers of fencing were put up to protect the perimeter during the inauguration. And so I was very fortunate to be there before all the fencing went up, because there was what happened in this photo is National Guardsmen were lining up outside the Capitol building, but they were moving down and positioning themselves. So I have about 3 or 4 different National Guardmen in this exact position. But I felt that this photo was the most important because of what we've been dealing with as a time of reckoning with racism, depending on your views of how the election is handled and how Donald Trump had handled the race issue in this country. I felt that it was very important to have a man of color out there showing, protecting the Capitol building. And it's driven home even more with the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic. And so It's a very surreal world that we're living in. I felt that this photo represented that.
Yeah.
Now, the photo on the far right was during, I want to say it was June 1st or May 30th of 2020. George Floyd had just been killed by Derek Chauvin, murdered by Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And Atlanta, being a cradle of civil rights, has always been a strong ally for the fight in civil rights. This is where I kind of cut my teeth with social justice. This is my community. And what you see here is a gentleman on top of the CNN sign in Atlanta on a night when about 15,000 protesters were out marching for Black Lives and were met by law enforcement. And things had started to escalate in front of the CNN Center. And so I think there's a lot of symbolism in this photograph, but particularly with CNN and its relationship with Atlanta. And what I mean by that is, you know, for years and years, when there was protests in Atlanta, usually they would start in Centennial Park outside the CNN Center, which is right in the middle of the city. Marches would happen and they would come back. And a lot of that was to try to gain awareness from CNN, which is one of the largest news organizations in the world. And time after time, you would see multi-thousand person marches outside of the CNN Center, and there would never be any acknowledgement from CNN. This day was different, where the protest was kettled right in front of the building, and eventually tensions flared and a riot broke out. The CNN Center took the brunt of force of it. But since then, I've actually had several meaningful and self-reflecting conversations and arguments with people from CNN about what took place that day. And I think it's very important that they couldn't ignore what took place this day. So for me, this has a lot more symbolism than just him on top of the CNN Center sign. It reflects a bigger story within that.
Sorry about that. Yeah, definitely. Now we're going to change just a little bit.
Sure.
To me, this is one of my favorite photographs I've ever seen and that you've ever taken. There's just something about it. Can you tell us the context of this?
I didn't speak to this gentleman. This was 100% a candid shot. But I had gone to Chicago in 2015 to make a book. It was entitled 85 Hours in Chicago, and a 65-page photo book. And the title explains what it is. I was there for 85 hours. So I didn't really sleep. I ran around all day. I was trying to get these vantage points and every cool shot I could of Chicago. And I can't remember which building this is. I don't know if this is the Sears Tower that I'm shooting from or it's the one in the distance. But either way, I had come up here originally to photograph the cityscape from there. And when I had first arrived up there, this gentleman was up there with two women. I assume that they're Amish, just assuming, or Quakers. And they were standing up there and they were looking around, and this photograph happened. And, I didn't ask for permission, because mostly when you take photographs of people and you ask for permission, you get a pose, and that's not real kind of street photography or photojournalism. But this is also one of my most favorite photographs. And for me, it strikes home because I think it's a meeting of two cultures, where I like to imagine that he's overlooking Chicago and kind of contemplating where the difference in worlds are. Mm-hmm. If I remember correctly, with the Amish community, there's a rite of passage where they leave the community and go explore life outside the community, and either they can return to their community or be banished. And so I've always kind of looked at this photo as a winds of change, and it's the context and the contrast between two totally different societies is what drew me not only to take this photograph, but also why it's a more meaningful photograph. I think since I don't know a lot of the context about him, his story, it leaves more to the imagination and interpretation of how it's viewed, but I think we can all see from the photograph that it is definitely a meeting of two different cultures that,
Yeah, it's
are separate from each other.
there's just so many layers to it.
Yeah.
Like, that's America, Like,
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, we're gonna go to the famous people section now.
I like to think of these as, they're not famous people. These are important
Yeah,
people
they're very important.
in civil and human rights. So the photograph on the left is of John Lewis, who passed away just a couple of years ago. He was my congressman, and I was there for his naming of John Lewis Freedom Parkway, which is a road in Atlanta. And one of my ongoing beliefs in my personal opinion of social justice work is that you show up for a community's joy just like you show up for their pain. And I think that's important as a photojournalist to not only document the hardships in society, but also the wins. That's really important, and it gets ignored a whole lot. So I went and photographed his naming ceremony of the road, and this is my brain isn't working right now. Clark Atlanta, which is an all-black school, all-black college in Atlanta that was leading a march, a drum march for him and a band march. And I think it just symbolized up the day really well.
Right.
The photograph in the center is of former President Jimmy Carter. Every year at Emory University, he speaks to Emory. And it was the first year I got to go and photograph that and watch his speech. And I'm a fan of Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the White House in the 70s, and Ronald Reagan ripped it off. Jimmy Carter is instrumental for a good relationship between the United States and China. He doesn't get a lot of credit, and I think he was a one-term president because he was so anti-war. But I love Jimmy Carter, and this is one of my favorite portraits because the guy is old and he looks beautiful and happy. And just to have a good portrait of Jimmy Carter, I'm very thankful to have.
Yeah, when I saw you post that, I was like, that's a damn fine portrait, sir.
Jimmy looks good, man.
Yeah, he looks great.
It looks good, And then on the third is Jesse Jackson, who came to Standing Rock to stand in solidarity with the water protectors during the No Dapple movement. And I really appreciate this photo because he's wearing like a cowboy hat and riding a horse, and that horse is beautiful. And the gentleman with the Crow Creek, hoodie on, which is a very symbolic photograph. But the thing I like about it is it's two cultures that are both fighting in parallel form for many of the same rights that have been ignored within this country historically. And coming together to work towards the same cause. And, that's what I appreciate most of this photograph is, my personal theory is nobody's free until we're all free. I know more people share that theory, but I think this photograph symbolizes what that actually means to show up for other communities and to stand in solidarity in person.
Yeah, 100%. I thought it was really powerful when I saw that one. I was standing with you and Wayne when you guys were taking this. And I remember these two ladies. They were very nice. Do you remember their names? What's their names?
Oh, man, I'd have to look in my notes. I'm so bad with names. The lady on the left, I actually just hung out with like 4 months ago. Oh, but I'm so bad. I can't remember their names, but they are both from the Navajo, the Dene people. And this was on Day of Mourning, or also known as Thanksgiving, during a large action at Standing Rock. And I just love this portrait because it's it's a modern symbolism of an ancient story. And what I mean by that is that, I ran media check-ins at Standing Rock for months, and I watched a lot of white people show up who wanted to take photographs of natives in headdresses and just, the classic what you think a native looks like, right?
Right.
But this photograph has the resemblance of that, but as you could tell, it's a very modern photograph, and I think it's old world style with a new world flair, and this is just who they are.
Right.
And I thought it was very important. Actually, the woman on the right is transgender. And I didn't know this at the time. I actually just found this out. And that, for me, makes that photo even more powerful because there's transgender and two-spirit presence in this camp. And to be able to show the power of that, they were two strong women who I just love the portrait. I mean, I could try to.
I mean, even when you don't really know the context,
Sure.
the photo that you took, like in a cultural context, you took the matriarchal line.
Yeah.
Like on both sides, because especially with the Navajo, they have the Bradash, and the Bradash were the two spirit that took on a lot of the roles of the, like, they were born male, but were of, and that's what this person is. And you kind of captured that Navajo line there.
It just happened too.
Yeah.
And they're both awesome folks. I've been able to speak with both of them. I can't believe I feel like such a jerk because I know
it's okay.
As soon as I get off video, I'm gonna remember her name.
My professor would be like, "Remember, kids, always get names."
Well, I have names. I just
don't have them in front of you.
Yeah.
All right. So this is kind of like a little bit in the vein of where you're going right now. So
sure.
Let's talk about this.
So I've been on the road for the last 8 months. I've been photographing a lot of the nation, and more of I've kind of stepped away from the humanist photojournalism stance for the moment, and I've been focusing on landscape photography because I feel that in the discussions of justice, I try to use my photography as a form of awareness and a form of activism, and at least move with meaning with my photography. But I feel that in the world of justice right now, although we have a lot of issues happening with the human crises across the country and the world, the conversation of the environment always gets the back burner and is always second. It's always human problems before the earth. And for me, we have to care about the earth, and it can't be a secondary conversation. And so I've been traveling, photographing the United States in hopes of inspiring people to reconnect with the land, get off our cell phones, get back into nature, get our feet in the dirt, and remember why, we could talk about protecting the earth, but sometimes we need to be reminded why it's worth being protected. And so I've been searching for the beauty in the places that I go, to hopefully encourage other people to not only visit these places, but remember why we fight some of these fights we fight. So the photograph in the top left was actually, I think that was taken 6 years ago in Atlanta. It was just a cloud, but you could see the gold lining and the silver lining around the cloud. It was just not many times you get lighting like that in the clouds. I just thought it was beautiful. Nature is a beautiful thing to me. The bottom left is actually double rainbows over destroyed houses from Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico in 2017. This photograph kind of just symbolizes to me, even in the hardest times, and you can see it with some of my other photography from Standing Rock to various different issues, that, there's moments of beauty even in the hardest times. And so having a double rainbow right behind destroyed buildings is kind of a metaphor for that. And the third photo on the right, the large one, I've entitled Grandfather and the Bear, and this was taken right outside Taos, New Mexico, in 2019, I believe. I was having a really bad day. I couldn't find a photograph that I wanted to take. I was fighting with my ex-girlfriend on the side of the road about where we should go because we were going everywhere. And then all of a sudden, this spring storm started to come through in the distance. And in the cloud, you could see the face of an older man. You could stand outside for 100 years and never have such another defining face of that in the cloud. And actually, to the left of him or her, depending on how you view a photo, clouds are very interpretive. I feel like you can also see the face of a bear. See with the eyes and the snout and kind of the ear up there. And so, it was it felt like nature was speaking to me directly, because you don't just stumble across a moment like that. And we did. And so I feel, with my photography that I've been working on lately, is really connecting with Earth on a lot of scales, not just, I can't tell you how many times in the last few months I've stood out in the middle of the field and literally screamed at Mother Nature to give me what I wanted, because I'll show up and it would just be dead in the sky. And, it's not all thank you. Sometimes it's screw you, give me, but you show up and you try, and sometimes it works,
Right.
But that's what I love about nature. Photojournalism is really about, depending on what you're photographing, it's about how fast you can recognize a frame, or how you can tell a story within a photograph, but your senses have to be there, especially in protest photography. But nature photography is a totally different game. You have to sit there for hours, sometimes days, to get what you want from a photograph. And I think if you can learn the patience and learn how to be quick with your eyes when it's needed, it'll make you a better rounded and a more rounded photojournalist. But I've been working on patience, which is really hard for me.
All right, this is going to close it out.
Sure.
So, I put up here ryanvizzions.com. You want to tell us about your Monroe Gallery?
Sure. So, when I went to Standing Rock, I was just a photojournalist in Atlanta and a photographer in Atlanta. I haven't worked for any news organizations. It was never about taking the traditional path. I just loved to shoot photos, right? With Standing Rock, it kind of threw me for a loop. I didn't realize the impact I was making with my photography. I knew I was making an impact with my photography at Standing Rock by helping raise awareness, but I didn't really understand the context of where that stood in a historical aspect. After the camps ended, and about a year later, I got contacted by Monroe Gallery, which is essentially the best photojournalism gallery in the world. They were one of the first, if not the first, gallery to start treating the art of photojournalism as an actual art form where you sell prints. They've been around for about 30 years. And they had contacted me and they said, we like some of your photographs from Standing Rock. Would you be interested in having us represent your photographs? And I was like, I don't know anything about this business, right? Like, I'm just a guy with a camera. And so I went and looked at their list of galleries that they represent. There's a bunch of guys I've never heard of, and women that I've never heard of. But when I clicked on their photographs, it was like Tiananmen Square, Iwo Jima, the sailor kissing the woman in Times Square, Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X, you name it, the most impactful and influential photographs of all time this gallery represents. And so somehow I ended up with them. And so it's given me an opportunity to not only have their support, they understand my path is different than most photojournalists who work for a large organization, because I'm really big in understanding where we stand in society with social media and how that is actually very powerful to control your own destiny as a photojournalist and be able to work outside the realm of traditional photojournalism. But it's given me a little bit of credit, but it's also given me a lot of mentors. the wife of former photojournalist Bill Epridge, Adrian. She's one of my mentors. Bill Epridge is a gentleman who took the photograph of sorry, my brain is freezing. Robert Kennedy's assassination.
Mm-hmm.
He's taken some of the most known photos of Woodstock. Anyway, Tony Vaccaro, 98 years old, photographed World War II. He's one of my mentors. But yeah, it's kind of given me an opportunity to be represented by veterans in the photojournalism world that understand I'm doing things outside of a traditional form. Because I think we live in a world that's not traditional.
Right.
You know, we all can tell our own stories now. And so, you know, I'm very thankful to be with Monroe Gallery. And I often wake up wondering if I actually deserve it.
Oh, you do, bro. You do. So just really quick, because we got to kind of wrap it up.
Sure.
But I remember that last stand, past child camp. I have the GoPro footage somewhere. I really need to find it, give it to you. But like, that was such a powerful time. And the fact that you got that moment and that day, it just brings me back to that. Like, I could hear it.
Yeah.
I could smell everything in the air. I can hear what was being said. And the fact that you got it framed the way you did, I'm like, of course Ryan did that.
Well, so the photo on the left was February 2nd, 2017, I believe it was.
Yeah.
What you see at the top of the photograph is teepees that were just erected that morning at a camp that was called Last Child Camp, which was named after the group of warriors that rode with Crazy Horse. And that morning we knew that police were going to come up and they were going to arrest the people that were on the top of the hill. And this bear cat that's centered in the bottom of the frame had been off to the side milling around for a few hours. I could see that people were eventually going to get on it and they were going to drive down the path that it's on right here, and that would line up and it would make a contextual story photo of what was happening. So I stood where I took this photograph for probably, what was it, like 10 degrees outside, maybe?
No, it was so freaking cold.
But I stood there for about 2 hours because I knew eventually it would line up.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, it worked out. This photograph I posted it on Facebook and it went so viral. It won Photos of the Year from ABC News and The Guardian. And it did what it was supposed to do, which was, you know, make an impact and help raise awareness. There's one thing that I've learned through some of my mentors in photojournalism and Monroe Gallery that they've explained about my work, but also what was very important is 50, 60 years ago when you had newspapers, it was really important for photographers to be able to sum up what was happening in a situation within one or two photographs. You don't have it now where you can tell a whole story, but you had to be able to put into context the whole environment within an image or two. And I'm not saying I can do that all the time, but I've had a few images that have been able to do that, this being one of them. And, you know, it's hard to say whether or not this photo is more known than the Defender Sacred photo.
Right.
But they're both up there.
Right.
So,
yeah, it's powerful.
thank you.
Yeah. So thanks for spending time with us, Ryan. It's really been great having you come visit. I haven't seen you since 2017. So any last words for anybody out there?
First off, thank you. And hi to your class. Hello, class.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, last words. I became a photojournalist out of chance and situation. I've taken a very non-traditional approach towards photojournalism, which fortunately for me has worked out. But it's not a traditional path, and you have to take advantage of opportunity when it arises, but there's no guarantee it'll arise. As I was telling you earlier, you know, in the conversation of photography and photojournalism, and, you know, people always ask, you know, if you have any tips for photographers or photojournalists on how to become better at the craft. Just like I was telling you yesterday, is that a big thing for me has always been the photograph and manual. I use automatic focus, but everything else is always manual. And I always try to encourage people to put your camera in manual, leave it in manual at all costs, and take a million photographs, and you'll figure it out. You'll figure out your own style. You'll figure out how to operate that camera without thinking about it. And I don't know if I have any advice, but that would be it. Stick your camera in manual and leave it there, and you'll figure it out.
Thanks, brother.
Thanks, man.